In my 100 years of guard watch, I've seen tourists pour in by the millions. I've watched time stitched in ceremony, boots strike stone in perfect rhythm, and silence held as sacred as the crown itself. We are trained to move not an inch, to speak not a word, to react to nothing. But once in a lifetime, something happens that breaks even the oldest lines in the manual. Today, I recount not just a breach, but a moment when silence spoke louder than commands, when one step forward became a legacy, and when the line between protocol and compassion blurred before our eyes. This is no ordinary guard tale. This is the story of when the Royal Guard broke formation, not for threat, but for something far more powerful. Tradition defines the Royal Guard's unwavering discipline. It is not merely a duty, it is a heritage etched into every fiber of the uniform, every motion of the drill, every command given and obeyed. This discipline is centuries old, passed down through generations of watchmen and ceremonial protectors. For those who serve within its ranks, the weight of history is not burdensome. It is a solemn honor. To the outside world, the Royal Guard may appear to be statues in motion, figures bound to pomp and circumstance. But within that stillness lies a deeply ingrained code of conduct, rooted in loyalty, silence, and precision. Discipline here is not simply expected. It is embedded, like muscle memory, in every step and every gaze. Training does not end with physical preparation. It is spiritual, mental, and psychological. Every guard must master not only the posture of stillness, but also the art of emotional neutrality in the face of distraction, chaos, or provocation. Their duty is absolute. Whether standing before palaces or along ceremonial routes, they embody a living institution, one that has endured monarchies, wars, revolutions, and centuries of social transformation. And yet, the Guard remains timeless and unmoved, a pillar of constancy amid a changing world. When a member of the Royal Guard takes position, they become more than an individual. They become a representation of the nation's identity and heritage. They surrender the self to serve the symbol. This is why discipline must be unwavering. A twitch, a glance, an unprompted movement. These are not simply breaches of form. They are breaks in the sacred continuum of tradition. Discipline, in this context, is a language of respect. To the monarchy, to history, and to the countless guards who stood in formation before them. That discipline is most visible in the execution of duty. Whether enduring extreme weather, the noise of tourists, or the unpredictable antics of onlookers, the Royal Guard remains focused, grounded, and composed. Their training reinforces this through repetition and ritual. Days begin early with drills that refine every gesture. Inspections are unyielding, ensuring that uniform, weapon, and bearing are impeccable. Even breathing is trained to be silent, posture perfected into a display of controlled endurance. But beyond the surface, discipline in the Guard is a mindset. It is about restraint in the presence of emotion, calm under the pressure of surveillance, and clarity of purpose despite any external influence. The inner world of a guard is in constant regulation. They are not free to react, not free to show anger, amusement, or concern. Their face, like their stance, must remain firm, unreadable. This is not coldness. It is service. In this way, tradition is the anchor. It offers a framework that allows discipline to thrive. Every guard knows they are part of something greater than themselves. They know that their role is not casual, but sacred. They are not only watched by the public, but by time itself. The parade ground is a symbol of order and silence. It is not merely a location, but a stage upon which the unspoken values of service and ceremony are performed. The ground itself, often polished and guarded, is a controlled environment. one where every motion has meaning and every presence is intentional. To step onto the parade ground is to enter a space governed by unyielding structure and solemnity. This ground holds more than footsteps. It holds centuries of ritual. Here, the act of marching is no longer about locomotion. It becomes a declaration of resolve. The turning of a heel, the slam of a boot, the alignment of bodies, these are not random or decorative. They are codified acts of allegiance to history. No one arrives on that ground without knowing its significance. No one stands upon it without understanding the silence it demands. The silence of the parade ground is not empty. It is charged with reverence. It is the quiet that speaks volumes, the kind of silence that silences the world outside. This silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of restraint. It is the discipline of the tongue, the stillness of the hand, the intentional suppression of everything that is spontaneous or expressive. The silence is respected like a sacred rule. Voices are lowered, movements soften. Even the air seems to hold its breath. This silence allows for something rare, collective unity. In the stillness, individual identities dissolve into a shared presence. The guards become one, their movements synchronized, their energy harmonized. The order on the parade ground is not just physical, it's psychological. There is clarity, symmetry, and a kind of peace that only comes from precise structure. In this place, chaos has no place to land. The boundaries of the parade ground are more than painted lines or ceremonial rails. They are psychological thresholds. Outside of them lies the everyday world, full of noise, confusion, and unpredictability. Inside is discipline incarnate. Once a guard crosses into this realm, their focus sharpens, their stance tightens, and they assume the gravity of their role. Within this space, nothing is accidental. Every element is considered, from the placement of feet to the turn of the head. Civilians, tourists, dignitaries, they all sense this difference. Though they may not understand the full depth of tradition behind the ceremony, they feel the weight of the silence and the discipline it reflects. The air on the parade ground feels heavier, not because of pressure, but because of presence. The ground itself seems to absorb noise, absorb movement, demanding a kind of reverence in return. This environment heightens the challenge for those who serve. It is one thing to be disciplined in private or in training. It is another to maintain perfect composure under the scrutiny of hundreds, sometimes thousands of eyes. The parade ground is an arena of expectation. It amplifies every deviation, every imperfection, and still, the guards remain steadfast. This is why silence matters. It becomes a tool for concentration. It drowns out distraction. It isolates the mind from the unnecessary and draws attention inward to the rhythm of breath, to the alignment of spine and shoulder, to the mission that must be carried out flawlessly. The parade ground does not permit improvisation. It is governed by tradition, ordered by protocol, and protected by repetition. Guards do not make decisions here, they execute roles. In doing so, they preserve not just decorum, but identity. Every detail, from the glint of a button to the rhythm of a march, contributes to a greater narrative. And in that story, silence and order are its most eloquent verses. A lost child disrupted the calm with innocence and fear. Among the lines of rigid posture and ceremonial decorum, amid the motionless rows of uniformed stillness, something fragile and entirely unguarded appeared. A small boy, no more than 6 or 7, weaving through the edges of the crowd. His steps were uncertain, his face unreadable to many, yet clearly searching. He was not part of the order. He was not part of the plan. And still, in the vast open space marked by formality and control, he became the unexpected center of a moment no one had prepared for. The setting was structured. Tourists behind barriers, guards in formation, officers observing from a distance, the polished choreography of heritage unfolding like it had for generations. But through the ritual and the rhythm, the presence of the boy, so plainly unfiltered by expectation, caused a ripple, not a loud one, not a cry or a scream, just the fragile tension of a small figure whose vulnerability became immediately visible. He moved as children do, unaware of boundary or rule. His steps did not follow the polished cadence of the marching boots. His eyes did not recognize the lines of authority or rank. He was just looking for something familiar, something safe. His small hands clenched and unclenched, his breath short, his pace unsure. To most observers, he might have appeared lost in curiosity, but to anyone watching closely, it was clear this was not exploration. It was confusion tinged with fear. He had no guide, no outstretched hand to grasp, no voice calling his name. And in that space designed for discipline, his innocence stood out like a fragile thread cutting through iron. He passed too close to the line, too near the formation. The crowd murmured. Cameras rose, half out of habit, half out of concern. Still, the child continued, undeterred by the silence or the spectacle. The dissonance between his presence and the solemn environment around him magnified the tension. Every guard had seen distractions, flash photography, loud tourists, even sudden movements. But this was not that. This was not mischief. This was not disrespect. This was a child, plainly and painfully out of place. There was no defiance in him, only uncertainty. And as he wandered, closer to the center, he looked not at the spectacle, but through it, as if searching beyond the crowd for something, or someone, that was supposed to be there, but was not. A mother's panic underscored the urgency of the moment. At first, her voice was not heard. Only her eyes, wide with alarm, scanning the faces and bodies of the crowd like a storm scanning the horizon. She was moving fast, but not frantically. Her stride cut through tourists, weaving in and out, unbothered by apology or politeness. She did not look at the guards, or the ceremony, or the spectacle unfolding. She was looking for her child, and the look was unmistakable. Panic does not always scream. Sometimes it surges inward, compressing everything into tightly coiled movement and breathless searching. Her hands were half raised as if prepared to reach forward at any second. Her breath caught in her chest as her eyes darted across the faces of other children, hoping to find his, fearing she might not. In that crowd, beneath that sun, surrounded by tourists and tradition, she was one person among many. Except to her, everything else had disappeared. Only one thing mattered. She did not pause to consider rules or ceremonies. She did not stop at barriers. Maternal urgency knows no boundaries, and it certainly does not bow to decorum. In her mind, time had narrowed to seconds. Every heartbeat counted. Every movement either brought her closer or delayed her from the thing she feared most. That she was too late, that he was too far, that he was gone. And for a brief moment, those fears looked real. The child was now dangerously close to the line, the invisible wall between order and unpredictability. And still, the mother's voice had not yet reached him. She called, but the noise of the crowd drowned it out. Her footsteps quickened. People turned, startled by her pace. Some pointed, realizing what was unfolding. A few tried to help, unsure where the boy was, unsure where she had come from. But she kept going. The pain of a mother separated from her child is a language older than any uniform or ceremony. It is immediate, instinctive, raw. She was no longer a tourist, no longer part of the watching crowd. She was a mother in crisis, and the air around her grew tighter with every breath. Her panic clashed against the calm of the setting. The guards did not move. The protocol held, and yet something in the tension shifted, an invisible thread pulling tighter as the moment drew closer to a point that no script had accounted for. The mother's panic began to resonate with those nearby. Her fear, once private, became visible. Faces in the crowd changed, conversations stopped, cameras lowered. Everyone understood now. The moment had transcended performance or pageantry. This was real, and this was immediate. Her child was there, close but not close enough. She called his name again, louder now, desperate and cracking. It broke through the hum of the setting, piercing the quiet with a voice no one could ignore. Her face was no longer controlled. It was filled with urgency, the kind that leaves no room for appearances. Her eyes locked onto the small figure standing near the formation, and in them was a mixture of hope and dread. Everything about the moment was against the grain of the setting, the disorder, the unpredictability, the raw emotion, and yet it was this same clash that made it so powerful. In a space defined by restraint, the uncontainable love of a mother searching for her child became the loudest force. The crowd, once a sea of observers, now stood silent, not out of respect for tradition, but in reverence to something deeper. The need for reunion, the bond between mother and child, the silent prayer that the next few steps would bring them together again. The mother moved faster. The child had still not seen her. The distance remained, but it was closing. The guard stepped out of line, deliberate, precise. In an institution where every inch of motion is governed by centuries, old tradition, this single movement carried the weight of both significance and silence. It was not abrupt. It was not chaotic. It was calculated and calm, executed with the same precision and authority as a command in drill, yet it bore no precedent in the manual. One foot moved forward, the posture unchanged, the grip on the weapon still firm. Yet everything in that moment altered. To step from formation is not merely a change in position. It is a shift in role, a departure from the ceremonial identity that defines the Royal Guard's presence. Their purpose is to stand unmoved, to embody constancy in the face of all external stimuli. The Guard exists within a boundary of control, mentally, physically, symbolically. So when one among them crosses that threshold, it is not without cause. It is never impulsive. It is done with the full knowledge that every eye is watching, every camera recording, and every movement being measured against the gravity of their station. And yet he moved, not to engage a threat, not to follow an order, but to reach a child. The action was silent but spoke loudly. In that deliberate break of symmetry, something deeply human emerged through the layers of protocol and presentation. The child, still unsure of his surroundings, now faced something different from the unmoving figures he had wandered past. This guard, no longer part of the immobile line, had become something more, not just a representative of tradition, but a protector in the immediate and personal sense. The ground between the formation and the child, though physically small, represented a wide gulf of expectation. Within that space lay the sacred rules of conduct, the unspoken agreement between institution and observer, that the guards do not react, do not emote, do not stray. And yet here was a moment where standing still would have meant abandonment, not discipline. It was a choice between symbolic duty and real, living responsibility. The guard's movement was subtle enough to avoid spectacle, but distinct enough to break the ritual. There was no fanfare, no dramatic gesture, just the measured steps of someone who recognized a need, evaluated the cost, and acted without hesitation. The child did not recoil. There was no fear, perhaps because in the approach there was no aggression, no authority asserted. Only presence. Around them, time seemed to slow. The air grew heavier with awareness. For those witnessing, the moment separated itself from the rest of the ceremony. It was no longer a performance to be admired from behind a screen or rail. It had become something urgent, real, and strangely intimate. People stopped recording. Some lowered their cameras entirely. Others simply watched, drawn into the clarity of a simple human gesture occurring in the midst of centuries. Old tradition. The child looked up. There was a beat of recognition, not of the person, but of the intention. That someone had seen him. That someone had come to help. The stillness of the ceremony had broken, and in its place stood the presence of care. Protocol was momentarily set aside for compassion. The laws of conduct, memorized through months of training, internalized until they become reflex, these were not abandoned lightly. In the Royal Guard, protocol is more than procedure. It is the embodiment of national dignity, a living code that transforms individuals into guardians of continuity. To step outside of it is to acknowledge something greater than tradition, the living needs of the moment. What occurred was not a rebellion against rule, but an affirmation of why rules exist in the first place: to serve, to protect, to preserve. And in this rare instant, preservation meant deviating from the script. Not to disrespect the code, but to fulfill its deeper purpose. Compassion, after all, is not absence of discipline. It is its highest expression when tempered with judgment and clarity. The act was brief, but its meaning ran deep. The child, now guided gently away from the inner perimeter, found his way back toward safety. But it was not the child alone who was moved. It was the spirit of the entire setting. The audience, the officers, even the distant observers, each bore witness to the subtle power of a principle momentarily laid aside in favor of empathy. The guard did not change expression. There was no smile, no gesture seeking praise. The face remained composed, the posture dignified. Yet the choice had already spoken for him. There was no ambiguity in the meaning. In stepping forward, he had placed care above ceremonial rigidity, without losing the integrity of either. This moment of compassion created a rare intersection between the symbolic and the real. The Royal Guard, usually viewed as an emblem of endurance and unflinching stoicism, had revealed a dimension that transcended spectacle. This was not ceremony, this was not theater. This was a response to human vulnerability made not with flourish or sentiment, but with solemn understanding. Even as protocol was momentarily set aside, the dignity of the institution was not diminished. It was in many eyes elevated, because within that pause from formality, there was a return to the most foundational reason for order, to ensure the well-being of others. The decision was not one of impulse, but of finely tuned awareness. To know the rules so completely is the only way to know exactly when they must be bent. The compassion shown did not unfold in words or explanation. It was action, quiet, firm, measured. There was no announcement, no disruption, only a brief deviation that felt more like fulfillment than departure. In that moment, the values of tradition and the needs of the present did not conflict. They converged. And for a few seconds, centuries of rigidity softened, not in weakness, but in strength. The kind of strength that recognizes when holding the line is not as noble as crossing it for the right reason. The kind of strength that sees no contradiction between honor and heart. Duty was redefined through an act of humanity. The guard's oath was not broken, but deepened. In that single deviation from formation, he showed that true duty is not about unthinking obedience. It is about understanding the purpose behind the posture. His responsibility did not begin and end at remaining motionless. It included awareness, discernment, and the readiness to act when someone was vulnerable in his presence. This was not rebellion. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that emerges when principle is matched with presence of mind. The uniform, the training, the protocol. They do not exist to glorify the guard. They exist to protect the people, to serve the nation, to uphold dignity through visible discipline. But when a child, lost and afraid, enters that space, the meaning of protection must evolve. The ceremony is not more sacred than the people it honors. In that second, humanity became the highest form of service. The break in formation was not a fracture. It was a moment of moral architecture, rebuilding duty from the inside. It is easy to imagine duty as something static, rigid, like the measured steps of the parade. But real duty listens. It watches. It recognizes when rules are tools, and when they must bend to serve their original intention. The act was not loud, nor was it boastful. The guard moved with the same precision he had been trained in, but for a new purpose, one written not in manuals but in conscience. That is where the meaning of duty lies. To onlookers, this moment may have appeared simple. A soldier stepping forward, a child being returned. But within the guard, that step was layered with consequence. It carried the full weight of expectations, of tradition, of silent eyes watching from across the centuries. And still, he moved. Because when a child is lost, and a mother is searching, and fear hangs thick in the air, duty is not fulfilled by silence. It is fulfilled by stepping into it. It redefined service, not as something distant and symbolic, but as something present and responsive. The movement of the guard was not just a break in protocol. It was a moment of alignment between the ceremonial and the real, between honor and instinct, between what is written and what is right. It affirmed that true discipline includes the courage to act when no command is given, that leadership can exist without a title, that loyalty to a code must never surpass loyalty to the people that code is meant to protect. No words were spoken, yet the message was clear. In that moment of still air and sharp eyes, where the routine demanded silence and the world held its breath, the absence of speech became its own kind of language. The guard did not shout. The crowd did not cheer. The child did not cry out. And yet everyone present understood exactly what was unfolding. The meaning cut through the quiet with startling clarity. Care had taken precedence over appearance, and discipline had made room for mercy. This was not the silence of routine. It was a charged silence, filled with weight. A message formed not by syllables, but by presence. Each movement carried intent, and that intent spoke louder than any formal declaration. The crowd, previously absorbed in the spectacle, now watched with a reverence born not from grandeur, but from recognition. They had seen something break through the surface of ceremony, something unmistakably human. The mother, though breathless and afraid, did not need an explanation. When she saw the guard move, saw her child safely guided back from the edge, there were no words exchanged. There didn't need to be. Eye contact, posture, movement, these were the tools of communication now. They replaced paragraphs with a glance, replaced speeches with a gesture. In that moment, language became irrelevant. What mattered was that help had come, calmly, deliberately, and with absolute understanding. The guard's face did not change. He said nothing. He returned to position with the same quiet discipline with which he had stepped out of it. Yet he left behind a message that lingered in the air long after the formation resumed. It was a message about balance, how tradition must coexist with compassion, how protocol must answer to presence, how true strength is measured not in stiffness, but in the ability to move with purpose when the unexpected arises. The silence became a witness. It held the emotion of the moment in place, allowing it to stretch across time and memory. Tourists lowered their phones, some unsure if they should applaud or simply remain still. No one dared speak too loudly. The stillness carried more meaning than any cheer ever could. It was a reverence not for the spectacle, but for the substance behind it, for the realization that something deeply right had occurred. That silence also protected the dignity of the moment. No interviews, no statements, no headlines needed to fill the space with noise. Those who were present understood, and those who heard about it later would understand too, not through explanation, but through feeling, because some messages don't require translation. They arrive intact through the force of example. The absence of words made it even more powerful. It prevented distraction. It centered attention not on what was said, but on what was done. In doing so, the moment became universal, beyond culture, beyond language, beyond tradition. Everyone who witnessed it carried away something personal, something lasting, a silent gesture, a break in routine, and the unmistakable echo of compassion held firmly within the hands of discipline. The crowd shifted from spectators to witnesses of something greater. At first, they had gathered for the pageantry, for the uniforms, the precision, the ceremonial march that has defined centuries of royal presence. They came to see tradition, to record it through glass screens, to add it to their albums and memories as part of the expected spectacle. And for a while, that is all it was, an elegant display of formality, an ordered performance beneath the weight of history. But when the child appeared, lost and uncertain, when the guard moved and protocol gave way to compassion, something changed, not just on the parade ground, but in the hearts of those watching. The shift was nearly imperceptible at first. A soft gasp here, a tilt of a head there. People leaned forward, not for a better photo, but to understand what they were seeing. The air thickened, not with noise, but with attention. The guard's quiet departure from line, the mother's desperate approach, the recognition in the child's eyes, these were not events that needed commentary. They unfolded naturally, but with a weight of meaning. And in watching, the crowd transformed. They were no longer tourists or casual observers. They had been drawn into a human moment that existed beneath the ritual and outside the schedule. Something ancient and personal stirred in those who saw it happen. Some had children of their own. Others remembered what it was to be lost or to search in fear. The movement of one guard, silent, firm, compassionate, became a mirror, and in it, the crowd saw more than a ceremony. They saw a truth that often lies hidden beneath layers of formality. That empathy is not weakness, that compassion is not disorder, and that even within the strictest traditions, the human spirit can move with grace and purpose. They watched without interruption, phones lowered, voices stilled. Even small children sensed that something had shifted, and in that shared silence, something rare occurred. The crowd became unified, not in applause, not in noise, but in still presence. They bore witness not to an accident or to drama, but to a quiet act of choice, a choice to honor humanity above routine, to prioritize the frightened heart of a child over the unbroken line of custom. It was this clarity that transformed the moment, lifting it above the expected and into the meaningful, and once it passed, they did not move quickly. They remained for a few extra breaths, not out of obligation, but because they had been touched by something unscripted. Their hearts beat a little slower. Their eyes stayed on the place where the child had stood, where the guard had stepped. The gravity of what they had seen held them there in a rare state of reverence. They had come expecting to be entertained. Instead, they had been reminded of something deeper. And though the formation would continue, though the steps would resume their rhythm, a memory had already formed, indelible and quiet. The moment passed, but its imprint lingered in silence. As the guard returned to formation, posture unchanged, face composed, the world resumed its pace around him. The ceremony picked up where it had paused, the rhythm of boots against stone continuing with practiced grace. The lines reformed, the tourists regained their chatter, and the usual sounds of city and spectacle began to fill the air once more. But inside the space where the child had wandered, where a mother had found her son, and where a guard had chosen to move, something invisible remained. It wasn't spoken about, not in that moment. There were no announcements, no official words marking what had just occurred. Yet the silence carried more than any declaration could. It was a silence full of breath held too long, of emotion suppressed in the dignity of formality, of awe wrapped in respect. That silence, shared by hundreds who had not spoken to one another, became a binding thread. It was acknowledgement without words, gratitude without noise. It filled the space more powerfully than any trumpet or command ever could. And in that stillness, long after the moment had moved on, the imprint of what had happened remained. People who had come for pictures now carried a story, a real one, not just of uniforms or formations, but of instinctual care revealed in a place bound by rules. It would be told softly, perhaps to children years later, or remembered alone as a rare time when ceremony made room for something personal and true. It would live not in headlines, but in the quiet memory of being present when a symbol of order became an instrument of kindness. Even for those who did not fully understand what they had seen, who might not know the gravity of a guard stepping out of line, the feeling remained, a subtle ache in the chest, a quiet warmth, a moment of reflection in a place built for observation. They might forget the exact date, the details of the schedule, or the names of the guards on duty, but they would remember how it felt to see discipline make space for mercy, how it looked when someone chose humanity over appearance, and how silence, full and wordless, became the loudest expression of all. You've just watched a story few would believe, but many will remember. If this moment moved you, subscribe to a one-story teller where we guard the truth behind every tale. Until next watch, hold your line, but never lose your heart.